Next up, we have navigating mountain town growth and intensity to meet climate and community resilience. We have Kara Silbernagel. And I apologize. Fun facts about Kara. Kara's been with Pitkin County for 11 years and in her current role for 4 years, and she can't think of a better place to be planning and working on climate within that work that she's doing. And on a personal level, she loves spending time skiing, biking, hiking, horseback riding to explore all the special places on our public lands. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kara.
Is this one? Okay.
There we go.
All right. Well, thank you all for having me. As mentioned, my name is Kara Silbernagel. I'm the Deputy County Manager at Pitkin County. And just a curiosity from all of you in the crowd, how many of you have heard from your community that we have too much growth happening and we have to address the growth issues and those pressures? Okay, I kind of thought it was a little bit of a common theme. So what I'm here to talk about is actually what we've done with Pitkin County is taking some of our climate action goals and some of those pressures around growth and how we actually blended them together and did work actually through intensity work to meet our climate action goals and our community values. So a little bit of background, maybe. Okay, so this is just a caveat. I think that we all know this and hear this very often, that, when we traditionally, when we've talked about growth, I think a lot of times in mountain communities, especially in Pitkin County, it's been about population growth or new home development. But I think what all of our communities, and especially in Pitkin County, are hearing it from our residents is this level of intensity. There's just always so much, and it is flying in the face of our community values and the climate action goals that we've set for our community. And so what do we do about it? And so one of the things that we started to look at is this felt feeling of intensity, trying to redefine growth and as a means to try and actually tackle some of the biggest issues in our community and meet our climate action goals. And so really thinking about it as the activity that is happening, not necessarily the population growth, the daily visitor count that I know we're all looking at, the home growth, but just what is happening day to day and what can we be doing to think about it and look at it to meet those climate action goals and values of our community. So what Pitkin County did is a little bit of background. In 2019, Pitkin County claimed a climate emergency, which was really the first step in setting our climate action goals. That was pretty powerful and has really been kind of a guiding light for our community. So in 2021, we adopted these climate action goals of reducing our greenhouse gases by 90% by 2050, all residential net zero by 2030, as well as working across the region because we recognize that climate does not stay within our political boundaries, and also trying to apply an equity lens to that work and seeing how it impacts people. From there, the Board of County Commissioners actually set forth a citizen group to actually look at, through the lens of our climate action goals, what we can do to address growth and the growth pressures in our community. And that through that process, we actually established 4 key community values. They aren't really new, they just were kind of redefined. The biggest being environmental stewardship is now bold climate action. I think that it's just a natural iterative process. But those values are really rural preservation, bold climate action, how do we maintain a balanced economy, recognizing what is the basis of our economy, and that equity and affordability piece. No small tasks, they're obviously at odds with one another as well, but using that as a means to start to think about what can we do to look at Pitkin County in 2050. So the way we kicked that off actually is we had a citizen group and we said, what's the Pitkin County that you want in 2050? And it was a lot of bold climate action, and it was a place where their grandkids and kids could come back to live and work. And I think that's a goal that throughout mountain communities, we're all striving to achieve. So with that, what we started to learn through this citizen group is they really started to speak about, we've done a lot on how do we manage growth, but they really started to talk about, this is about intensity. It's, the traffic every day. It's what's happening in the rural areas seems misaligned with what we've been setting in place for a really long time. And so we actually studied that. And so that's what I'm here to talk about, is we try to capture this phenomenon of intensity and how can that actually start to align some real actions for our community and our county. And what we found is that it is a real and quantifiable phenomenon within our community, and that it definitely is inconsistent with not only the values and the climate action goals we've had, but it also is creating pressures where we haven't focused capital infrastructure in the past. So we, as a mountain community, have focused that infrastructure in those urban areas through bus systems, infrastructure of water, and others. And as we look at what this intensity is in those rural areas of the county, that infrastructure is no longer aligned. And that's also having real impacts, not only on just all of our capital projects, but also our climate action goals. So what we did, we commenced what we called an intensity study white paper as part of our what we're calling Vision 2050, which is essentially our comprehensive plan and building and land use code rewrite. And we used this as the foundation of it. And so when we started to look in rural Pitkin County, we saw three real phenomenons, which is this economic study intensity. So where are those jobs happening now? The jobs are not just happening in the urban areas, and that needs to be actually captured. Transportation obviously is a huge piece. I think the cleaning staff that used to just go to the hotel and go up and down by elevator is now going from car to car and across town to clean those different places, and that is having a real impact. And then what's that impact on our climate goals as well? And so what we found, and part of this, why we took it on is, again, traditional growth, you're using census data, you're using Bureau of Economic Analysis, or you're using labor data. That doesn't always capture what's happening, especially I think in the construction and development community. We've got a lot of sole proprietors. In our area, it's really a tri-county region, and so we were trying to say, how can we set a new baseline for understanding the job creation that's happening and where it's happening? So as you can see from here, what we found is that on-site home-related jobs through various data showed a 16% decline, but that's actually because most construction companies were moving out of Pitkin County and actually driving further from their home office to homes in Pitkin County, which is actually having a bigger impact on our VMT and our greenhouse gas emission reports. We also saw a huge increase in off-site job creation, and this is, again, really kind of the phenomenon of more sole proprietors starting up, and then how is that, and then more wealth agencies coming too. And so really starting to capture how big basically the home redevelopment is in unincorporated Pitkin County and the jobs that is creating throughout the entire region. And so what we found is that an estimated 71% of new residential jobs are associated to homes in Pitkin County, which is very different than kind of your traditional stats are going to show. And then again, the reason that we looked at this is to say, what is the job creation that is happening outside of those traditional areas, those traditional urban core areas where we focused a lot of infrastructure? So just key takeaways is that we found that large homes, and we found that this really does increase. Our threshold is basically a 5,000 square foot threshold, was where we found a really big increase in job creation and how big that job and those jobs are in the area compared to kind of a normal trajectory that we would be looking at. And then, as I mentioned, the phenomenon of the home office or the offices are moving further away from the county, but it doesn't mean that the job sites aren't still happening in the county. So a larger impact on transportation intensity, which I will go to next. So the other kind of leg of the stool that we looked at was transportation intensity. And this is really coming from the assumption that, we heard anecdotes. I'm sure a lot of you have heard various anecdotes in your community of, there's 10 cars at a house every day or 30, or, what is happening out beyond where we have invested in transit and other mechanisms that are kind of those traditional paths to meet they're just really good planning practices and climate goals. And so we actually worked to redefine new criteria for transportation. So we have home-based work and then home-based other trips. So that's kind of the idea of the commuter, so the person driving to the office. There's those trips. There's the trip of taking your kid to school or whatever it may be. And then there's really the trip of going to another person's home to serve that home. And that's really this new definition and variable that we created in this intensity study. And so what we found in this chart, and hopefully you all can see it, is the blue is it's by square footage, but the blue is kind of your traditional transportation patterns of most of us in the room and, across America, of what are those daily trips that you take going to work, going to the grocery store, blue is kind of those basic day-to-day trips that we all take. Red is those trips to work, which you can see, and then green is kind of those trips that are someone coming to service the home. And so what we found is as square footage increases, there's a much larger percentage of daily trips, and these are average daily trips that are happening. And so what you can see is, about 4 daily trips are attributable just to someone coming and servicing the home, which is if you've got a lot of homes outside of regular transit areas, that is only adding to much more traffic on your rural roads that maybe haven't been planned for that, and just more traffic going back and forth between different places, maybe never even going to those urban areas. And so what we found is that this is actually, we worked with Kimley Horn who did this research, and what they found is this is actually a phenomenon that they've only ever seen in more like where there's a college campus area where you see so many trips that are kind of not within your traditional day-to-day, whether it be day-to-day life or commuting. And so we really kind of have each of these homes is essentially now starting to serve as a commercial node by means of transportation. And so when we look back to our climate action goals, transportation is 33% of it, and that's just for unincorporated Pitkin County. This is one of the biggest levers that we have to try and capture and try and reduce. And then the other big finding that we saw was not only do those employee trips increase as home sizes increases, but the vehicle miles traveled also dramatically increase, right? So, if we're in our own community, going to the store, going to school, ideally those are shorter trips. Those trips to serve those homes are sometimes 50 to 100 miles away. And so that's only at a regional level also really impacting our greenhouse gas emission goals and our the impact on our community values too. And so the third piece that we looked at was climate intensity. And so as I shared, one of the goals we had was net zero by 2030. And so we've had a lot of debate in our community, and I'm sure many others, of, hey, the more efficient you build the home, size doesn't matter, right? You're meeting the goals. We can do whatever we want to do. What we did is we actually took data from our electrical and our natural gas utility providers, so real data. We don't have access to see which home it is, but they provided it to us based on square footage, and started to see what the electrical and the energy use was to try and capture those impacts. And so this is extreme, but it's also, I think, a really good photo to share. Is we've got a 15,000 square foot home that they put 100 kilowatt PV. I know, it's crazy. So yes, are they meeting our net zero goals? sure, is that really our goals that we want when we talk about net zero or our community goals? It's not quite aligned with what we're looking for. So what we found is energy use is really, it's not even linear, it is exponential, especially once you get mostly above 7,000 square feet. We use REG out of Crested Butte, couldn't recommend them more, to help with some of this analysis. That basically as house size increases, the energy consumption also increases, and this is a lot to do with those what we call amenity loads, so whether it be exterior energy or even interior energy, right, that those amenity loads, there's just a higher and higher percentage of that. And so what we found is that, let's see, I have a better stat in there, but that homes on average are 14.3%, more. The larger homes are 14.3% more energy. But as you can see, if I have the other one, I don't have the other stat. Oh yeah, here it is. So that second bullet point is really the biggest, and it's one of the biggest levers that we've been able to use for future code changes, is that the largest homes are 41 times more energy than a 1,000 square foot home, and 26 times more energy for a 10,000 square foot home. And so when we start to look at our climate action goals, really also starting to look at what are the means of, what are the code changes and things that we actually need to be regulating. So again, where do we look at incentives, and what are the things that we need to be regulating to be trying to achieve our climate and community goals. And so what we've done, so again, this is all kind of under the lens of intensity. We've done a lot of work, a lot of mountain communities have, to try and address that pace of growth and change, but also starting to look at what does intensity mean for our community values, for the infrastructure and investments we put into our communities, and also the goals and the values of our communities. And so a couple of things that we've been able to do, because we've been looking at this through our climate lens also, is that we reduced our maximum house size from 15,000 to 9,250. I know that still sounds crazy, but that is this was, decades in the making, and it was really when we started to leverage this data with our climate action goals that I think we had a lot more community buy-in to say this is no longer acceptable for our community. And then we also implemented an exterior energy budget along with our friends at the City of Aspen of 200 BTUs, which really starts to bring down that energy use that I shared with all of you of where we see such extremes happening. And then the third that's not up here, and I think this is the next piece of where we're looking at, is bringing in kind of more of a tiered piece. So trying to incentivize those actions and intensity or growth, however you want to say it, and home development, we're incentivizing what we want to see, and then so reducing building fees with our new energy code for smaller homes. And then if you want to go larger, there's more regulations and kind of a little bit more that you need to contribute back to our community. So with that, I think I will hand it off for any questions.
Questions? Yep.
So it's an interesting question. Yes, when we talk about that, what we defined as large homes was anything over 5,000 square feet. So in general, most of those are second homes, and I think traditional thinking has been, well, they have less of an impact because they're not occupied year-round. But through a lot of this work, we found actually the same level of activity is happening no matter when someone's there or not. So the landscaping activity, the cleaning activity, the energy of moderating for various aspects of the home are all still happening year-round, regardless of if someone's there or not. Hi. As a commuter in this context, I would see that. A lot of them are. Yeah. Thank you. I think that the redevelopment of existing is the biggest nut to crack. One of the things that we're looking at and considering is, again, I mentioned kind of tiering and what are those incentives or, mitigation fees that if people want to do those things that they're going to have to give more to the community. And so what we're considering or, visioning is, can we take those fees and basically create a pot then to help with that redevelopment and that remodel to upgrade the existing building stock, especially more the smaller ones, right? Because there's a fine line between redeveloping the old stock that is really inefficient and then the redevelopment activity that happens on too frequent of a basis and is actually contributing to some of the greenhouse gas emissions. This one, we did look at water consumption a little bit. It was kind of tangential to the intensity study, but is looking at what is the water availability that's happening. One of the things that we found in our water analysis is Pitkin County, for a county across the state, has actually one of the highest percentages of, I'm going to get the terminology wrong, so someone can correct me, the lowest level of permitted wells in the state, and so those are only regulated at the state level, so we don't have a lot of control or authority over those, and so that's one dynamic that is hindering our ability to even understand kind of the whole water picture. But we did bring in looking at the existing service districts to see what was their capacity needs and what is their availability and reliability too. And what we found is that we might have some capacity